Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ramadan Mubarak. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Healthy Muslim in Ramadan. We've been talking about the calamities that affect us and what our attitude to that should be. For some people, the calamities affect not some aspect of their body or their possessions or their family, their sustenance. What happens to them affects the centrality of who they are. This is actually mentioned. It's the only illness, if you don't count the Quranic reference to the blind and the lame, where it says there is no blame on them. But the only illness that is mentioned in the Quran is dementia. In one ayah it says, "And we settle in the wombs whom we will for a specified term. Then we bring you out as a child, and then you reach your maturity. And among you is he who is taken in early death. And among you is he who is returned to the most decrepit old age, so that he knows nothing after once having knowledge." In another ayah it says, "And he whom we grant long age, we reverse in creation. So will they not understand?" The they the Quran is referring to is not the person who has been changed from a vigorous, wise person into a body that has no expression. The they that Allah is referring to is us. Will we not understand that He is in control of everything that happens to us, even the centrality of the thing that we regard as the thing that makes us who we are, the essence of our personality. That too can be taken away. Alhamdulillah. Sometimes the changes are more subtle. You will have a child who is doing really well, excelling at school, very, very competent, very popular, an athlete, excellent, getting all his exams right. And then he starts to seek his own company. And you think, well, teenagers, they're always changing. And gradually the drift becomes more permanent. And eventually, after lots of assessments, a confident diagnosis by a wise psychiatrist is that the patient is suffering from a condition called schizophrenia, which we understand to be a metabolic disorder of the brain. Not of the structure of the brain, but of the chemical neurotransmitters in the brain. And you watch a person transformed. There are other emotional problems, not of your own making, not of what you can control from your personality, but coming from left field. There's a disorder called bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder is fascinating. I call it the genius gene. We don't understand it. Well, what do doctors understand about anything? Not much, but in particular in bipolar disorder, there's a lot we don't understand. What is interesting about bipolar disorder is that the people who have it have a capacity, have a talent, which makes them successful. That talent can be expressed in a number of ways, but it is interesting how, when you look at bipolar disorder, how many famous people, competent people, heads of businesses, politicians and so on, are represented in the family of people affected by this condition. In bipolar disorder, you have mood swings, and the mood swings can be up, an upswing, in which case you have extraordinary energy, extraordinary clarity of thought, or it can be a downswing, in which case you can be almost mute, sitting in a darkened room, not wanting to talk to anyone. These swings happen without you causing them. You can't know that a feeling now means that something is going to happen by the end of the week, so you can rein it in. This is not a horse whose motion you can understand. This is something that takes over you quite literally. This is not the same as drug abuse, and many people with bipolar disorder are thought of as, he's high, he must be on something. No, this natural chemical swing happens because of a neurotransmitter change within the brain itself. The essence of who that person is fundamentally changed during this time. That person might be, in their natural personality, a very kind, considerate person. In a manic swing, he can kill somebody. He could misunderstand what somebody said, take a knife and kill him, just like that. When he's somebody who he would literally not hurt a fly, he would not kill a living thing. But in a manic swing, he could be a murderer. He might be a person who is respectful of women, kind and caring of women. In an upswing, he will rape somebody. Same person, absolutely the same body, but a completely different action, because a different set of chemicals are controlling what he does. The tragedy of this is that when he comes down back to his normal state and he looks back on what he's done, he feels the judgment of who he is now, not understanding that the person now is not the one who did the rape or who did the murder. Sadly, in law, the man now is responsible, with a few modifications, but he is responsible. So the person is left with this dilemma, sometimes called a split personality in the lay terms, but a very profound dilemma. How could I, the person I know myself to be capable of doing something like that? And yet the evidence is I did it, incontrovertibly. This man might be very careful with money. He runs a good business. In a manic swing, he will empty his savings account, go to a race course, and blow the lot on gambling. And when he sobers up, as it were, he's not drunk, he's drunk with his own neurotransmitters, not with anything external. He's in deep grief. How could I have done? How did anybody let me do this? I think these illnesses are very interesting because although, of course, you would be deeply sympathetic and caring, understanding that this person that you know who did these terrible things which have affected the family, in fact, you have to, I mean, obviously, if he's killed somebody, raped somebody, you have a responsibility to be caring to the victims of this terrible crime. But where is his responsibility? Although this is a mental illness, there is a dim reflection in what happens when we are not fully in control of the things we can be in control of. So it's useful to look at these illnesses and see how in some way we should understand the twin soul parts of our own soul, which are capable of saying things that we shouldn't say when actually we're quite a kind person normally, but suddenly you've said something that is really very bitchy and very unkind. And you think, oh, how could I have said that? But I did, and I must take responsibility for it. Then there's another form of illness, if you like, or change, which happens as a child grows, called autism. In autism, the personality is stable, but there are widely varying areas of capacity in the individual. I'd like you to come back after the break, because we have to understand what we can learn from all of this. Thank you. Welcome back. I'd like to illustrate the types of mental affliction that we've been talking about by giving you examples, because it's very difficult to describe this in the abstract. These mental illnesses are not the same as the vagaries of mood which you or I have. They're much more profound. A friend of mine who is a very distinguished man in charge of an American pension fund, which is currently worth in the region of $130 billion. That's a sum which is more than most countries' economies. And he is the chief financial officer. Developed bipolar disorder. At the time he developed it, he was already mature, already in charge of this fund. And his family didn't actually notice. They'd notice he got grouchy, but old people get grouchy, so latitude was given to certain mood changes. Then it became apparent that he was losing weight really fast and appeared to be agitated and wasn't sleeping. And some odd mannerisms appeared. And I came to see him. He got his BlackBerry and put it on top of my head. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I want to record your thoughts." I said, "Well, I don't think they're worth recording." I'm glad he agreed with me. But clearly there was profoundly disordered thinking. On more sensitive questioning, I discovered that he thought that the Russian embassy were communicating to him through the radiator of his car, and that the reason he was losing weight was that he thought his wife was poisoning his food, and the reason he was agitated was that through the night he couldn't silence the messages that were coming in code from some higher spiritual power, and he was straining to write them down to get their meaning. You and I would call that mad. We could not understand what he was trying to get hold of. However, I knew this man to be, quite apart from being an eminent financier, he was a scholar of the history of the Second World War. And all of the distortions of his imagination about the Russians communicating with him and the code that was coming through, giving this great meaning, was to do with a conflict, an Armageddon that was going to happen, that he had to stop. So it did actually link into his human personality. I was worried. He was still in charge of this $130 billion fund, pension fund. I mean, what was going to happen? What was his judgments? So as we started his treatment, I said, I think before anybody else does this audit, you ought to look back and track, perhaps in quartiles, what your decision-making has been over this time, and whether there's anything you need to correct. He came back to me, he said that was an interesting exercise. He said, I actually went back 10 years because my financial, this is the sort of thing you put into a computer and it's very easy to quantitate. He said, I have never been better. My judgments have been flawless against the market. There's a clear peak in my performance. He said, but when I saw 3 6s, I took that to be the sign of the devil. And even if I had analyzed the company and the project and seen it to be good, I wouldn't invest in it. And if I saw the opposite, I thought it was a sign of an angel. And even if my intelligence told me it was a donkey, I put millions into it. Allahu alim. I don't understand. Schizophrenia is another fascinating area. We realize that in the schizophrenic, there is a progressive deterioration of function. But there can also be flashes of insight and brilliance that are completely different to anything ordinary people can perceive. There's a parallel to schizophrenia which is called autism, which is not quite the same thing, but we know more about autism than we do about schizophrenia, in that we can see that in autism, the failure of perception is that when you look at something, instead of seeing a pattern and immediately taking a judgment of what's important in what you're looking at, the person sees everything, every detail with equivalent weight. I'll give you an example. Take 2 people. One, and they're both in a similar situation. One is talking to another person and feels angry. And in a flash of white-hot anger, he seizes a knife, and the next thing he knows, there's a dead body at his feet, the knife is in his hand, blood all over his clothes. Clearly he has killed the person in front of him. He has no memory of it. That person bursts into tears and is in deep shock at what he's done. Same situation, another person. They feel insulted, they feel angry. They pick up a knife. In total slow motion, they observe with distinct clarity every detail of the light glinting on the blade. As they bring their knife, it shudders as it goes against the rib cage of their victim. And as that happens, they see a fly going up the wall. They hear a car backfire in the street. They hear a baby crying upstairs. It's as if everything is in slow motion, and everything they see have equivalent weight. That person observes what he has done with astonishment, but he remembers it, but doesn't feel connected to it. In law, that is the act of murder, and both are equally culpable. But are they the same action? Is there the same responsibility? In the first, neurophysiologically, I will tell you that is the mammalian brain demonstrating an overactivity of emotion. In the second, this is the reptilian brain, perhaps if you like the autistic, schizophrenic, tight brain where emotions are absent, but there is clearly not right thinking. Within these people are real human beings. Take Joyce. I loved her. Joyce is in the Guinness Book of Records as the woman who is the most vicious murderer of all time. Vicious meaning she killed her landlady with 370 stab wounds. Joyce was a schizophrenic. She'd worked in a laundry. She had a terrible life. I draw a veil over it. Her landlady threw her out without informing the social workers. Joyce spent the whole night outside the house waiting for her landlady to leave so she could come back to her room. Got back to her room, the landlady started banging on the ceiling. Joyce went to see her, and fearing that her landlady might attack her, she took a cheese knife. The next scene we have is another person in the lodging house of single rooms who saw Joyce saturated in blood, looking very puzzled, saying, "My landlady won't talk to me." This lodger didn't fear Joyce. She asked her to sit down. In true English tradition, she said, "Would you like a cup of tea?" She gave her a cup of tea, and then she went upstairs and saw the landlady and called the police. I met Joyce when she was serving a life sentence for murder. Is she culpable? I don't know. I loved her. I don't think she was responsible. But she committed a grave crime. We must realize the special talents also that people have who have brains that are not the same as us. We know about Stephen Wilshire. He's an autistic young man. You can ask Stephen to drive along the embankment and to draw what he sees. He'll turn his back, having glanced at a complicated building. He'll draw it perfectly. Another young man, an autistic friend of mine. Kieran probably has only 3 or 4 words. But put Kieran in a room, he'll start screaming if there is anyone in that room with anger in their heart. He will laugh and giggle if there is anyone in the room with deep spirituality. I need Kieran in my life. He's my lodestone. It's important to love the people who are different. Thank you. Please come back. Assalamu alaikum.